Binal Chaco has served as a leader in ministry and in worship and internalized the values, beliefs, and expectations placed on him by others. In this episode, Binal shares where this led him, the false idols he pursued, the trials he faced, and the near fatal result. He also describes how God intervened, saving his life and leading him to new avenues of helping others. Finally, Binal talks about the Clevera platform he's created to help small business owners set, plan, and achieve their goals. I'm delighted to have Binal Chaco as my 16th guest on the Work and Worldview podcast.
The question they asked was, does it feel weird that you're not in quote unquote ministry, right? And what I said was, at some level, you realize this is not for everybody, but this is my story where no matter how much I've tried, and I have tried, just being very honest with you, no matter how much I've tried, I cannot disconnect myself from God's purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And I promise you I've tried. I've tried. I have tried to say, like, just give me a break. I'm just being honest.
It's wild you admit it. Most people won't admit it.
I'm just going to say, I have to be, like, after the last number of years that have happened, I could tell you a talk I had with God. I said, look, let's just take like a 2-month sabbatical from each other, is what I said. Because I was like, I had come to a place where I thought,
it's so funny. I'm sorry.
No, I'm just being honest. You know what I mean?
Stay out of my life and I'll stay out of yours with God.
Yeah, I was like, I'm not trying to I don't want to wrap it down a life of sin. I just need and I don't want to be dramatic because it wasn't what happened to Job, but man, I had a small fraction of it, and I thought to myself, can I just have a moment?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember thinking just yesterday, someone asked me this question. I said, honestly, though, no matter what I tried, he would never let me go.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not that he forced his hand. It's just that he always remained. And over the years, no matter what, I try to convince myself of, and no matter how many times I ran away, and no matter how many moments that I chose things that weren't him in the moment, he would never not choose me.
Mm-hmm.
And there were days where I was like, there's somebody else that you can use, God, right? There's someone else who could learn this lesson.
Yeah.
There's somebody else that could better do this for you. And so many times, this is where that David story makes so much sense to me. I'm like, but it was never about the somebody else, but it was about the you. And, just yesterday after our conversation, and I was talking to this young man yesterday, and you could tell he was in a really low spot. And I looked at him and I said, the reality is for some of us that when we have an assignment on our life that asks a little bit more of us, a little bit more is demanded of us. And there are moments where you're going to want to be done with it. And there are moments where you're going to want to quit. But when you have the call of David, or even the call of Peter, or even the call of Saul, who became Paul, right? Sometimes running does nothing, because you're going to have a Damascus experience, right? Or with Peter, you're going to have a moment at the shore where someone comes off a boat and cooks you, or you're on a boat and someone's cooking you breakfast at the shore, you realize it's the savior of the world, right? Or you're going to have a David moment where you realize that at a young age, I was called. At an older age, I took my eyes off what my purpose was. And all along, he still was there for me, right? Because it's like that. Because in one season, I was like, this makes so much sense, God. But in another season, when my eyes were off of what I thought was meant for me, I thought, oh, maybe you're done with me. And there's a part of me in confession to you. It's like, I kind of was self-sabotaging, hoping he was done with me. I was like, okay, maybe I can breathe now. The moments finally accumulated where my life has shown him I'm not the one. My true self has come out. He says he's not going to want Binal anymore, right? I think of David and Bathsheba. I wonder if David thought in that moment, okay, finally, since I was 13 years old, God has put me on this trajectory of having to live a life that's on this directional move this way. But then in his old age, when he's king and he's supposed to be at battle, but he chooses to stay home and not go to war, and then he finds himself slipping into sin, and all of a sudden his life choices take him down a pathway of destruction. Do you think David had a moment where he said, okay, finally,
Mm,
finally,
mm,
because that's what I had.
mhm,
And I
mhm,
realized even in my finally, God's like, "Nah, I got you.
mhm,
You're not quite done yet."
mhm,
And I realized that there's no amount of running, there's no amount of hiding, and there's no amount of fleeing that when there is this distinct purpose that's put on you that you can run from.
mhm,
And it's one of those things where, I have the honor in this season of my life to spend time with a lot of people where my and I'm in the marketplace now. So I'm not in traditional ministry. I'm not on, I spent so many years on platforms preaching while I was doing marketplace, but my primary, I always thought, even if it didn't make me more money, I always considered ministry the primary and the marketplace secondary because it was what quote unquote fulfilled me for so long in my life, right? But then in this season of my life, my all of my life, quote unquote, is the marketplace. And it's one of those things where every single day I'm with literally every day of my life, I've spent time with people who don't know him or who don't follow him. And I realized for me, like it was never, it was about the question I always ask myself in this season, where before it was, I have believers who come into a room and I get to tell them about something they believe in for the most part, right? 80 to 95% of people. But after the last number of years of my life, God's put me in places where maybe like 40% of people who come into my space are active believers,
mhm,
and the rest are just coming because they're in a space where they need help.
mhm,
But this time the help they're looking for is how do I make more money, right?
mhm.
People come to me to find out
Sure.
how do I find more
Yeah.
success and make more money?
Yep.
And that's the audience I work with like a majority of now.
Mhm,
Or the underserved where people with uh, intellectual physical disabilities, that's a population. So I serve two populations primarily in this space, right? People who want to grow businesses and thrive into 6, 7, or 8 figures, or individuals who have been underserved, underappreciated, and underseen. And I
mhm.
get the honor of making sure that there's a place for them to know that they belong. And neither of which are traditional quote unquote ministry, but all along the through line never changed.
Right,
The
right.
through lines never changed because all along I have one distinct ask of me. It's like, hey, will you just love them with the way that I've called you to love them?
Yeah. Right.
And I'm like, all right, I can do this. So maybe there's not a platform or a microphone or lights shining on me. And maybe there's not applause after or people patting me on the back in a lobby or, and saying, hey,
Mhm,
great job,
mhm.
whatever. But what happens now for me is I get to come home at night. I see Parker, my son, and I have moments where I look and say, this is the story I'll tell. The story I'll tell is that even in my faithless moments, you were faithful.
Amen.
And it's the part of my journey that I can never deny, you
Mhm.
know?
Yeah.
Sorry, this is I already knew I was praying this morning and I knew that I was gonna get emotional on this conversation because I realized like, man, this is like I carried shame for a long time, you know? And I carried the weight of not enough. And I carried the lie that like I had to uh, I carried the belief that I had to have it in a certain way to honor him. And I realized it was never about that, right? Like from the beginning of time to the end of days, it's about one thing. It's never been about faithfulness, or it's never been about the or being the right image or the right picture. It's about like, hey man, like when I nudge you, like even in the midst of your lowest moment, will you just recognize that I'm nudging you? Right. That's what changed for David. Like that's what like David didn't confess. David was caught,
Yeah. Right.
right? And yet in being caught, David had a moment to make a choice.
Mhm,
It could have been denial and fighting and pretending, which
mhm,
is the natural response for anyone who's in that space.
mhm.
But David made a very conscious choice that said, "Yeah, God." And that "yeah, God" is really powerful and really hard to say, but sorry, that was a tangent. That wasn't even a part of any of my notes that I took for this conversation,
It's
but,
alright.
uh, I, uh, I recognize that part of the journey we go through in life is, um, the journey of a believer that I'm walking through is, hey, when God nudges you, don't ignore it.
Mhm.
When many years ago, one of my professors, and who I would call him a mentor in my life, he said, um, sometimes people are looking for their ceiling to open up and an
Mhm.
angel to like come
Right.
down and speak to them. And they're hoping, and
Very
that's
cool.
the sign they so desperately want that, like, oh, okay, that glory moment. And he looked at me, he goes, sometimes, Benno, it's just a tap on your shoulder. And if you're not paying attention, you're gonna miss it. So position yourself that when the nudge comes, that you can feel it.
Mhm. Mhm. Well
Because
said.
when you're constantly in the hustle and bustle and you're moving and you never pause,
Mhm.
when that nudge comes, you're not gonna feel it. How would you? How would you feel that? You know? And so how would you know that's there? And so, anyways, that's we can start our conversation, I guess.
Oh,
But
that's great. I keep thinking
yeah, it was the
thinking
one that
Elijah, right? The
yeah,
mouth
yeah.
of the cave.
Oh, yes. Oh my
The mouth of
gosh.
the
The
cave
story
part,
yeah.
like, it just keeps coming up as you're talking, and I just think,
Mhm.
like, yeah, that still small voice, it wasn't in the earthquake, right?
Yeah,
It wasn't with
yeah,
the rocks cracking open. We had high winds
yeah,
2 nights ago,
yeah,
and it was just insane, there was tornado warnings here, and,
yeah. You
you
guys
know
had it too.
yeah, so we woke up in the middle of the night and we just, it's like, "Whoa,"
Yeah. Yeah.
and you think of that story, like, there was a wind such that rocks were cracking open, right?
Yeah.
And God wasn't in the
Yeah.
wind, you know?
Yeah.
And God comes to him after all of his, trauma, I guess, I mean, he
Yeah.
was obedient, he did what God told him to do, but, he also was fearful, right?
Yeah.
Um, and it was that still small voice, it was just the Spirit speaks softly, and I do think you're onto a very good point where professional pastor or not, all of
Yeah.
us have a capacity to overlook that still small voice or to not hear it, and think we're dialed in, think we're doing all the right thing,
Yeah.
but not. It's
Yeah.
beautiful. But
Yeah.
no, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. Of course. Yeah, thanks again for just, opening the door to have this conversation. Um,
Yeah,
and, uh And honestly, I didn't even think about it. Like, Carrie is incredible, and I think your wife is a gem of a person, and
thank you.
that God has something. And so, uh, when I realized when you messaged me, we weren't even connected, right? Until you
Right.
sent me the
Yeah.
message,
Yeah.
and the recognition was from like Carrie had just put the anniversary post, and I saw um I immediately, and usually, honestly, I'm so reluctant for, not just because 'cause I'm just like, but I decided I said, "Yeah, let's do it." I didn't even think about it actually, and I said, "Yeah, let's do it." Like, it'll be a fun conversation,
Well, go
and I
Carrie.
really d
She's had
yeah,
some good
yeah,
recommendations, so, I gotta listen and
yeah,
trust her too.
yeah. And you know what? Yeah, I believe it, I believe it.
Yeah. So, okay, so let's, do the normal beginning of
Yeah,
the interviews. So
yeah,
so
let's do
what
it.
were the so, yeah, a little bit about your family background, and then
Yeah,
what
let's do
were
it.
your values in your home growing up? Where was that? You shared with me yesterday, but where was that? And, give a little background there.
Yeah, of course. So I was born in New York. I was born in Queens, in Richmond Hill, Jamaica Hospital, is where I was born, and
Alright.
it was a beautiful, beautiful. Honestly, it was a beautiful life for me. I was raised around family. Like, I'm the son of I'm a son of immigrants who, my dad immigrated here when he was 16.
Oh, wow.
Mom married my mom when she was 19, and she was living in India. Then she got her visa and moved here when she was 20. They were young. My dad was 21, she was 19 when they got married, and, uh, he journeyed here, um, with his dad and 3 brothers. So there were 7 boys, but in the hope to create this life that was not what they had. You know? They didn't grow up with much, but they grew up with family. And it was one it's to this day, truthfully, it's interesting, right? Because we live in a different time, but I still watch, like, his brothers, some of them will, like, talk on calls every day, but they're really intentional to, like, get on, like, these WhatsApp group voice calls like once a month, and
Mhm.
they carve space. And it's a really beautiful, beautiful thing,
Mhm.
truthfully, all these years later, because it's an art form that's dying in like the current generation, you know? But I watched my dad, like, I hear the stories he'd tell me, like, he didn't know the language. Like,
Mhm.
he came from a small state, India, when he was 16 in the 70s, you know? Um, w with his 3 like, he has 2 older brothers, and they came here, and they were, like, with no plan, right? So my dad's uncle, um, sponsored them, and he had got here, and they came here, and they were on this just, "We believe there's more." My grandfather was a pioneer. We lost him a few years ago, and he was a pioneer. Like, man, like, I mean, oh, I could tell the stories of him forever, but he was one of the strongest men I've ever met.
Mhm.
He's one of those guys that without asking, he'd be up at 5 AM, and by name, he'd pray for every kid, every grandkid, and he just, like, plead the blood over them, like, that yeah, people tell the stories of that grandparent, like, that was my grandfather and grandmother, you know? And I didn't know when I was young, but that was what built a legacy of my life. And probably in so many seasons of my life, that's probably what protected my life, was someone up at 5 AM covering me in prayer when I was making choices that I probably shouldn't have made, you know,
Mhm.
or,
Mhm.
in spaces I shouldn't have been in.
Mhm.
But I grew up in New York, and uh, it was a unique space, right? People ask me what was life like. It was beautiful. I grew up with my cousins, you know, like there were so many of us. And now there's like 33 of us first cousins. And now many of us have kids and multiple kids. And so it's a huge family. It's a huge family, but I didn't know any different.
Mhm.
Right. And so
Mhm.
I grew like, some of the values that I never left me was family. Like, you take care of family, you support your family, you love your family, and one of the most beautiful things for me to this day is, like, my cousins are kinda scattered all over between, like, New York and, some are in California and Dallas and Florida, and, even if we don't talk for 2 or 3 years, if I'm in one of those spaces and I text one of them, uh, without a question, like, we're getting together. Like, because that's just the relationship that was built for so long, and, because because all of us are a lot older and a lot of us have careers, but that one still value of family has never left, you know? Like, we look out for our family, and because I think it comes from the way my dad and his brothers had to survive, and
Mhm.
that's the word I'll use, they had to survive.
Mhm. Mhm.
Right? Like, immigrating to a country that didn't want them here or didn't understand them or they couldn't be understood, you know?
Mhm.
And, so growing up, it was a really beautiful time for me. You know, it wasn't like like, my dad was working in Wall Street at Merrill Lynch. My
Mhm.
mom was going to college to become a pharmacist, and she became a pharmacist, right? And so they were young, they were barely adults, like, and trying to find a way in a new country. And my mom is just moving here and going to school and trying to make a grasp of this situation.
Mhm.
And all of a sudden, they're parents now. I have an older brother, and then they had me, and a few years later, they had my sister.
Mhm.
And in all these senses, they're trying to navigate these things. And one of the cultural uh, foundations of our life was faith. So faith and family were 2 pivotal things. Like, it wasn't a it wasn't an option for me. Uh, faith was I was born into faith is what I'll say often. It has pros and cons. Definitely more pros than cons in my older life,
Mhm.
if that makes sense. In my
Mhm.
younger life, it was much more cons, you know? I'm like, "Oh my god, can I just get a break? Like, do I have to be up at" we our church services on Sunday mornings were listen to me. When I was young, we'd go to church at 9 o'clock in the morning and you don't leave till 1 PM. And I'm like,
Uh-huh.
what is this? Okay.
Uh-huh.
Like, this is like, that was the kind of church we were growing up in
Mhm.
because that was what it was like in India too, you know? And so it translates. So it wasn't like a multiple service. It wasn't like oh, here's your English service or here, it was like you're in a service and half the time you have no idea what they're saying because they're speaking in Malayalam. But you get to experience a culture, and it was a really beautiful part of it for me, truthfully. Now in this part of my life, it was really beautiful. In that part of my life, though, I was like, man, I don't know why I'm here.
This is very
And as
inconvenient to my teenage lifestyle, right?
are you kidding me? Like to any lifestyle, I was like, oh, this is so long. This is such a long process.
So
But it
was it
was
like
so found,
was it like
yeah.
a 3-hour sermon?
It would be like they would sing, they would have a worship time in Malayalam, and then they would have worship time in English. And a lot of those would just kind of like be spirit led, and a lot of movement there, right? Kind of
Mhm,
thing, right?
mhm.
And then think of it where there'd be testimony time every Sunday, right? And
Okay,
that would extend. And then someone would
okay,
go do like a Psalms reading. They would read a Psalm, and then they would speak for like 20 minutes. And then someone
okay,
would go and do a message, and they'd speak for like 45 to an hour, or an hour,
okay.
15 minutes. And so then it just kind of like somehow like it became one thing after another. Or
Right.
another. Oh, and then you start the day with Sunday school, right? And so you had Sunday school to
Yeah.
begin the day, and
Okay.
everyone goes to Sunday school, right? So there's like adults go to Sunday school, and then after everyone's Sunday school, then you go together for like the full service time. So it was like this. It was just like, after being in ministry and calculating schedules, and so yeah, I was programming tight 60-minute services, right? I was like, hey, listen, don't you dare go over 60. If you go over 60, we're gonna creep into our time to get people out of the parking lot into the next parking lot, right? So I was like, there was parts of my life where I'm handling production, and I
Mhm.
and I laugh now because like this is the first time I correlated. I was like, I was doing tight 60s, and back in the day, we were in like 360-minute services. But it was, in hindsight, there were some really foundational things I learned in those moments.
Mhm, mhm.
And I didn't realize it. I definitely didn't recognize it. I definitely didn't honor it for sure. I didn't honor it,
Sure,
like
at the
most
time, yeah,
definitely.
yeah.
Yeah. In this season of my life, I realized I learned that no matter how quote unquote inconvenient in what it was at the time, um, it instilled a foundation of faith for me. I mean, I would watch my parents pray and fast and prioritize the church in ways where I'm careful with how I say this, because I know there are people in my culture who feel like there was like spiritual abuse that happened, right? Or there was like neglect that occurred. And I don't want to like downplay those aspects of it, but also there was a foundation of faith that we cannot deny, right? You cannot deny the fact that faith was a streamline for individuals who walked through that pathway, um, or at least that was the desire they had for their family. For some people, it was perception based. We want people to see we're here and think we're here, because
Yeah.
culturally, I grew up in a culture where faith and family are really important, but so is
Mhm.
perception.
Right,
And that was
right.
a unique aspect of this, right? Just culturally, like the Indian culture, historically, it was built on a hierarchy system. And no matter, in old times in Hinduism, it was a caste system, right? And it was a deterministic way of seeing the value of people. And so, yep, even when that was no longer the religion and people said, hey, that's not the way we want to live our life, there's part of it that's really hard to separate from when that's the way you were programmed to think for so many years of your life. So you may not come to me and say that, oh, I believe you're here on a caste, or you're here on like a value system, but the way you speak and the way you treat somebody
Mhm,
and the way you talk about someone's ability, or the
mhm,
way you talk about someone's
mhm,
failure,
mhm,
it points directionally to, well, because you're not doing this, yeah, you're definitely not this. Does that
mhm.
make sense?
Yeah,
And what I
okay.
realized was like, I honestly, I would not change at all being growing up in an immigrant family, because it was so beautiful for me. And I had to come to terms after many years with, there's a few things I had to unlearn. One of them was this concept that belonging requires performance,
Okay. Mhm,
right?
mhm.
Like if I'm just being truthful, that was one of the hard things. There was parts of it, and my parents are incredible, but I watched my friends and even cousins of mine, right, where I lived a very blessed life. I'll use that word. I lived a very blessed life with
Hmm.
the parents that God gave me. To this day, I I wouldn't be who I am without my mom and dad, truthfully, because they let me take risks in my life that made no sense.
Yeah.
And a lot of other people in my culture never would have been able to do what I've done because there's no way their parents would have even like let them, you know? And I but uh there's this concept that you've probably heard of it. It's called identity foreclosure, right? It's I want to make sure I say this correctly. It means committing to an identity before you ever had the chance to explore who you actually are.
Oh boy. Okay. I've never
Okay.
heard that before,
So
but I get that.
yeah,
Yep.
it, maybe I made it up. I'll pretend like I did, but I'm pretty
Oh,
sure it's a real thing, right?
if you did, it's
But
brilliant.
identity foreclosure, yeah. It means committing to an identity before you ever had the chance to explore who you actually are. And uh, I definitely didn't make this up because I actually studied this it's coming back to me. When I was in therapy, my therapist helped me kind of unravel this a little bit. And what ends up happening is they say that most of us had our identities assigned or kind of like pushed to us by the age of 7, right? Like, so a lot of it by cultural needs, by environmental pressures, right? And sometimes by our parents' needs for some people, right? So, whatever the family required to feel stable um, was what came onto you,
Hmm.
right? So, this identity foreclosure um, is something you don't intentionally do. You don't even know is happening, but
Hmm.
it's happening.
Hmm.
And, like, I had this I had this thought yesterday, actually. Nobody wakes up and decides to spend 3 decades performing a false version of themselves,
Hmm.
right? But it's part of this concept that I had to, a few years ago, finally got language for, right? And we can unravel this a little bit deeper too, but, it's this language around a concept that I call borrowed armor, right? And this concept is that nobody wakes up and decides I'm going to spend the next 30 years of my life pretending to be a false version, but there's an armor that gets assigned before you're old enough to question it. So you just keep wearing it.
Where
And
does
it's
that
one of those, yeah, go
where
ahead.
does that term false armor come from? What's the origination of that?
For me,
Hmm.
oh goodness, I never had a name for this up until 2022, right? So this is like, I knew what I felt, but I never had language to communicate this. And, I went to a trauma intense 20-day, I got away and, like, therapy in a group setting, an individual setting, and, I have a background in counseling, and so I studied it in my undergrad, and I did a lot of it in my years of ministry, so individual counseling and even, like, premarital counseling and marital counseling, I did this for so many years of my life, so I was, from the outside, a huge proponent of this until it meant that I had to do it myself, right? Like, I told everyone, I recommended therapists all day, I recommended counselors all day, but I never admittedly wanted to go myself.
Hmm.
And part of that's cultural, right? Because I grew up in a culture that said, never share your struggle,
Right.
never communicate when something's wrong, don't let anyone see the negatives of your life. Because if someone can see your weakness, they're going to use it against you or they're going to think less of you.
Right.
So whatever happens in the house stays in the house and don't ever let it leave the house. Right. That was this like very, very common. Like, keep it right here. Keep it hidden. Keep it hidden. Keep it hidden. And that was what I understood from a very, very young age across my whole culture. And so that was what was regular for me. That was what was normal for me.
Mm.
And that's what I thought how you're supposed to live your life. There's every child, I studied this so many years, like, so every child creates an equation to make sense of their world, right?
Okay.
So for me, um I at a young age said that worth was equivalent to output.
Okay. Yep.
So for everyone it could be different, right? So
Hmm.
for some people it can be love equals service.
Mhm.
or safety equals vigilance, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Or significance equals novelty,
Sure.
right? The equation isn't necessarily wrong per se. They keep us alive to an extent,
All right.
but equations that make sense at age 7 become prisons at 37.
Wow. Okay.
And that's the reality I didn't know. And I I didn't know I was picking up borrowed armor at a young age, but what ends up happening over the course of life is when you are I'm a here's a confession, Jonathan. I'm a s I for a lot of my life, I was a serial people pleaser.
Mhm.
For some people who know me who listen to this, won't be shocked at all.
Right.
They're like, "Oh, yeah, yeah, that's for sure." You know what I mean? Like, "Oh, yep, we know Biddle, that's for sure." Because
Been there too.
I would be all yeah, yeah, and you know what? Hey, it's okay. We can start a safe group together, right? So we of recovering people pleasers, right? So it's this journey that I had to navigate deeply the last 4 years of my life because becoming a people pleaser literally almost took my life away from me, and it almost cost me everything. So while I had this beautiful foundation of faith and family that I'm so grateful for, I also had this loss of identity that I didn't know was happening because I was coming up in a space that convinced that taught me a few things about myself that I didn't know were true. So I wore them as my own. So then life keeps going on,
Mhm.
right? When I'm 9 years old, so my dad there's 7 brothers. My dad's one of 7 boys. All of them immigrated from India, lived in New York, and we were so close, right? Our cousins were all so close. My best friends were my cousins.
Mhm.
They were my closest friends. They were my best friends. And then when I was 8, my dad was working at Merrill Lynch. They offered him the manager position to run the branch in Miami, Florida.
Oh, okay.
Just so we're clear, I don't know anything about Miami, Florida. Like,
Right.
who's in Miami? What's in Miami? My dad had a really great friend who lived there.
Mhm.
And so he went and checked it out and he said, "Hey, this is probably a great move for our family. So we're going to go."
Mm.
Now, here's the thing. Like when you already have this identity, right? That of worth equals output, right? And you're kind of figuring the flow out at a young age. And all of a sudden, your safety circle of your cousins who are your best friends, and when you don't have to like, I had other friends I could think of like Ali, and there's a few of these guys I can still think of when I was young who were really close to me in my
Mhm.
young life.
Mhm.
93% of that circle all had the last name Chaco, and they all lived within they all lived within a 2 square mile of me, you know? And so I lived a great life, man. You know what I mean? Like I didn't have to try to make friends. My best friends all look like me, sounded like me, carry my same last name. It's a beautiful life I got to
Shared
live.
some genes.
You know what I mean? And so at 8 years old, when you're gonna be repositioned to a new space, you don't realize that, well, this is gonna be different now. And so at 8, we leave New York, we move to Fort Lauderdale to South Florida, and my dad takes on this role at Merrill Lynch down there, and he realizes very quickly that if you don't know Spanish, this is gonna be a hard job, and he
Mm.
says and he chooses to he stops working there. So all of a sudden, right, we move from New York to Florida for this thing, and he's not doing the thing, and I'm like, "Wait, why did we leave everything for what?" But the one thing I know is that was the greatest thing my dad ever did was to move us out of New York to South Florida. Because it did a lot of things, but it opened my eyes and my life to a space that allowed me to learn and experience the world in a way that I don't think I would have had in New York. There's ripple effects to this, and we can go deeper into those things for sure. And some people would say one thing or the other, but the truth for me was it was a really beautiful move. Now, a question you asked was where did borrowed armor or the phrase of borrowed armor? So I realized this is a really long way to answer your question. And what ended up happening was in 2022, I'm in this trauma based 21 days away. I'm in Boulder, Colorado. I'm in this session with a therapist, and he's looking at me And he's like, we're gonna try this thing called brain spotting. For anyone who's watching, it's a clinical um, practice that like a licensed therapist. If you're gonna do this, I make sure you go to a licensed therapist who's trained in this like practice to in modality of therapy, and not just have like some random person do this for you. And so it was really incredible because I was very skeptical. If I'm being transparent with you, like EDMR and brain spotting, like I've always known about them because of my years of studying, but they always sounded kind of kooky.
Mhm.
It's like, "Oh, okay, that's kind of like those like, it's kinda out there, it's kind of a weird thing," and, but I did it, and I'm in this session with this guy, and there's this, they have this, like, this noise, this
Mhm.
constant noise just keeps going, and you're following this traction thing, and he's saying words, and all of a sudden, I'm 13 years old,
Mhm.
and I'm in a room, and 13-year-old Binnall's in the room with me, and I'm realizing that at 13 a seed of rejection that I was so unaware of, Jonathan. Like, if I had spent all of my life and pointed back to me at 13, it would be one thing. A situation happened at 13 with an individual in my life. I'm young. I'm a teenager. It's not even a serious thing. But an occurrence happened at 13 with an individual in my life where someone that I had strong feelings for, as someone I really cared about, said a few choice words to me and made choices towards me that made me feel the deepest level of rejection.
Mhm.
And it made me feel like I'm never going to be enough at 13. So that as subconsciously, here's what happens to 13-year-old Binnell. He plants this seed that says, well, Binnell, you got to make sure you wear this armor that lets everyone know that you are worthy. Well, what does that mean? So that means I have to make sure and work so hard for the rest of my life that every room I go into, every friend I make, that they see how good I am as a friend to them.
Mhm.
So take care of them, be there for them, show up for them, do everything.
Mhm.
Even if it's not like fully makes sense to who you are.
Mhm.
And then sometimes you got to wear a mask, but it's okay. Put the mask on.
Mhm.
It's going to help you not get rejected again.
Mhm.
But don't worry, like it's okay. And then you go into one room and you wear this mask. And then you go to one room and you wear this mask. And you
Mhm.
go to one room and you wear this mask. And what ends up happening years later in my mid 30s, I had this moment, or in my 30s, I had this moment where I'm like, who the heck is Binnell? And it was like this, and a lot led me to get to that space. But the borrowed armor came from a seeded root of rejection that convinced me that I had to be enough. I had to show people I was enough by the things that I could do for them.
Mhm.
And you cannot win fights wearing someone else's armor that
Mhm.
you can barely walk in.
Mhm. Mhm.
The concept comes from a story in the Bible, right, of David and Goliath.
Mhm.
David is definitely one of my kindred spirits of scripture. Uh, I'm a musician by heart, so I was related to David in that regard.
Mhm.
But also, David was this fearless warrior that also messed up, and it feels like, hey, that's a story of my life. I always tell myself there's a few guys, if I was alive in biblical times, I think I'd be really good friends with. David being one of them, Peter being another one, and
Mhm.
probably, yeah, Peter and David definitely the two closest kindred spirits I always felt, right?
Mhm.
But the story of David is this young teenage boy who was a shepherd boy who had a lot of older brothers. Then David gets appointed to be king, right? Over all of his brothers. And they're already kind of mad that David, the little brother, gets to be king. But David's promise is king. David's assignment is still shepherd. So David at a young age, as a teenage boy, so just imagine for a second, okay? Imagine for a second, you're a 13-year-old kid. Someone comes to your house and says, you will be the president. Like, this is not a question. It's
Mhm.
not like some motivational, because Samuel, the prophet, who came to their house wasn't just some random person. He was a prophet from God. And in those times, that was like final word.
Mhm.
So Samuel comes, appoints him to be king. So that's his calling. So now imagine you're a 13-year-old kid. Someone comes, listen, you're going to be president. But for now, I need you to wash the dishes, and can you vacuum the floors, and can you just take care of the house? Hey, can you go mow the lawn still? And imagine most current 13-year-olds, if someone guaranteed they're going to be king, you better believe it's going to be on Snapchat, it's going to be on TikTok, it's going to be on Instagram.
Right, right.
They're gonna change their handles to
Yeah,
future president. You know what I mean?
yeah, yeah.
But David immediately said, "Okay," and went right back to the field to do what he was called to do. So then David goes to listen to his dad, and he goes to bring food to his brothers. And right, and they're having this really. There's a Philistine named Goliath who was a giant who is talking bad about God, right? And what ends up happening is David hears him talk bad about God, and David was from a young age, had a heart for the Lord. And he hears this and says, who dares to speak about my God this way?
Mhm.
And everyone's like, hey, relax, man, relax, relax, relax. You have no idea what you're trying to do. You're a kid. His brother's like, David, just stop it. And David's like, no, who dares? And he steps up and says, I will fight him. Right. And this little kid now is trying to go to war with a giant. And Saul's like, well, if you want to do it, here's my armor, because this is the armor that protected Saul in so many wars. So the armor has a purpose, and the armor can definitely protect in the middle of war, but the armor was not David's armor.
Mhm. Mhm.
And one of the most profound moments, I think, in all of scripture was when a young teenage boy looks at the current king and sees the armor that Saul put on him. He looks at the king and says, Saul, thank you, but I can't wear this. Because if I wear this, I will lose. And here's the problem, Jonathan. I didn't understand or cognitively uh, realize that at that age, I could say that. Right? And so I just put on the armor and I kept wearing it.
Okay.
So I had so many Sauls in my life who were well intended. Okay.
Mhm.
None of them were ill intended.
Mhm.
They saw me in moments, said, hey, this really helped me. Here you go.
Mhm.
Hey,
Mhm.
this really worked for me. Here you go. Oh, hey, here you go. And so there was a series throughout my life of armor that I would pick up and wear.
Mm.
And the borrowed armor felt like it served a purpose, but it was really a way for me to appease the people who were handing their armor to me. And so I started wearing armor all the time. And what ends up happening over these years, uh, so fast forward, at 17, I had this dream. I thought I wanted to be a pediatrician, and not just because I was Indian. I really thought I wanted to be it. I applied to some schools, but then at 17, before I graduate, I had this moment with the Lord, and I realized I'm not called to go to medicine. I want to use music to change the world. Can I just pause for a second and tell you, as an Indian kid who is a son of immigrants who sacrificed everything they had and who struggled and who literally like dug their way out of so much pain so their kids would never have to struggle. My dad built this beautiful life. My mom's a pharmacist. My dad built a great real estate company, right? This is right before the crash of '08, right? So like a few years before the crash of '08. So it's a good part of life, it's a healthy rhythm of life. And now their son comes up to them and says, hey, listen, guys, I'm going to get a degree in music. Like, imagine like any heartbreaking thing you could ever tell a parent is what happens at the time. But I just knew in my heart that this is what I was called to do. And it wasn't just, but then it was confirmed, right? I had 7 words of knowledge that came to me in a 4-month span from people who from different parts of the world who looked at me and said, hey, the Lord's going to use your music to impact the world. I'm like, you don't know me. Hey, you don't know me. Hey, you don't know me. But I couldn't deny it at the time. So I did it. So finally, I applied for a school in Dallas called Southwestern, and I made the very conscious choice to walk a pathway that my parents were not excited about. In the midst of all this, I don't recognize that I'm wearing borrowed armor, right? I'm just living my life in real time, in tangent, as the people pleaser I told you I was, right? So I'm a musician. I'm a friend. I'm traveling. And there was a quick stint of my life where I thought I was a rapper. You know what I mean? There were these different points and these moments of my life. And from the outside, I realized, so then I moved to Dallas, Texas. I find what I think is my people, my community. To this day, some of my absolute best friends in the world came in that season of my life, right? And then all of a sudden, I keep building these spaces on borrowed armor. And so, yep, I'm going into rooms and I get to go on stages and platforms. But I always have this like internal, never outspoken doubt within me. I wonder if they'll ever know that none of it's real, is what I always tell myself. You know, I'd always ask these questions about purpose or identity, or is any of this a real part of what I get to live? Where on the outside, it looked like I might be living the dream, but internally, I had this cognitive dissonance,
Mm-hmm.
right? Where
Mm-hmm.
this mental stress when you hold two contradictory beliefs at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So I am successful and I'm empty, but I can never say it out loud.
Mm-hmm.
I never felt the ability to share that. So people now will call it burnout, you know, or you need to take a break or whatever they would call it to be. But I was leading people and I was lost. But I didn't know how to differentiate those two things. And it took me a long time, but the human brain can't sustain that split indefinitely.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It takes this enormous energy to maintain two versions of yourself. And eventually, one of them is going to break.
So,
And
but
so,
no, let me,
yeah,
let
go
me
ahead.
ask you just in that particular space, right? For those who
Yeah,
might
yeah.
be listening, watching, uh, what are some of the symptoms that you're in that's where you are in life?
Yeah. Yeah. At a young age for me, it was, I would go back to initially it was my dorm room, and then it was the room at the house I had across from my campus. And I would have the most sleepless nights
Mm,
because
anxiety.
oh, so much. I didn't have words for it.
Mhm,
I didn't know what it was.
mhm,
I can remember so clearly being 18 and waking up in a sweat and being like, and I had these moments where these pits would be in my stomach, right? And I'd have these dark thoughts,
mhm,
these heavy thoughts.
mhm,
I'm like, I shouldn't have these thoughts. My life is good. My
mhm,
life is great. Why am I in this place?
mhm,
And the reality was, it was this war was happening inside of me of the two contradictory beliefs, right?
mhm,
Of you should be successful and happy, but I'm actually really empty.
mhm,
I'm leading people, but I'm really lost.
mhm,
And I never understood at the time those feelings I was having were just symptoms of that dissonance in my life and that pain. So yes, there was anxiety. That's a definite one, right? Truthfully, I had some really dark thoughts that would come. I
mhm,
never communicate out loud,
mhm,
right? I later probably would describe it as depression. The symptoms of depression came into my life at 18,
mhm,
but I never had words for so many years, but because also culturally, it's not something you talk about.
mhm. Sure.
And so I'm
Right.
studying, so I'm taking these psychology classes, right? I'll be in a class and they're describing something and I'm like, holy smokes, that's me. Like literally, I would be learning something. I'd be like, huh, okay. Definitely can't admit this out loud. You know what I mean? I'd be sitting there journaling saying, yep, definitely can't talk about this. Oh, I definitely can't talk about this.
Did that
And,
compound it?
oh, are you kidding me?
Because now
So
you're
much
like, "Oh, it's
worse.
really an issue and I have it."
Yeah,
Yeah.
so much worse.
Oh gosh.
Like,
Okay.
I mean,
Yeah.
probably for 8 years, I never talked about this.
Mhm.
Years.
Mhm.
And the weight just grew and grew and grew and grew.
Mhm. Mhm.
And it was this public success, private emptiness, and that friction is what was burning me so dry, right? A vacation was not gonna fix it.
Right.
Like, it was not gonna be like, "Let me just get away to South Florida for a weekend. Everything's gonna be okay," you know? Let me get some sun. That's all I and listen, the sun is great for you, and taking a break is really great for
Yeah,
you.
sure.
But it doesn't matter how big the stage is, if your story hasn't caught up to your reality, you're always gonna keep playing you're always gonna play small, and you're always gonna play a picture that was never yours to play. You're gonna be an actor in your life, and that's what I was.
Gotcha.
I was an actor playing a role in this thing called life, but I wasn't living true to who I am.
Mm.
And it's an identity that it's hard to communicate sometimes. And it's a hard thing for people to kind of really grasp because they ask for people who knew me well and know me in this season of my life, they're like, I never would have guessed that. And part of that is I was just a master at faking it till you make it.
Mhm.
I was so good at it.
Mhm.
I mean, and I mastered the art that it was an art form for me that I was so broken inside. I had hidden coping mechanisms that I was like secretly finding myself in lifestyles, you know what I mean? Like that no one would have guessed or no one would have known.
Mhm.
We were we I had a really great band that we were writing on music with. And it was so much it was a dream. Everything my best friends and I were writing music and recording together, and we're gonna travel and play and everything that you thought, but all along, all along, I was so broken. All along, I was so empty. And I just played this role so well for so long that nobody would have guessed.
And to what extent did you have consciousness of the fact that you were playing the role? Like, did you were you even was your self-awareness such that you knew you were doing that, or is it just subconsciously that's
No, no.
what you
At the time,
do? Yeah.
no, at the time, I was definitely not honest. I may have been self-aware enough, but never honest enough to say it to myself.
Mhm. Mhm.
So, in hindsight, it's 2020, right? And so, it's easy for us to sit today and talk about it, but in those moments, I was just in hidden pain, public success.
Mhm.
Hidden pain, public pu I was like, my high school superlatives, I won best smile, right? Because the one thing I could always do was smile.
Mhm.
It's been my MO. People who know me have said I've been smiling since I was born, and it's that nervous habit that I do. It's the thing that I don't know, like, I don't know how to not smile,
Mhm.
and so I always wore a smile,
'Kay.
uh,
Gotcha.
until the smile was carried in pain. And so, in the moment, I didn't have words for it. There's no way. 'Cause listen, I'm leading hundreds of people to the Lord, and I'm on some platforms with thousands of people, and I'm doing these things, and I got to record an album when I was in college, and one of the songs got featured in Worship Leader magazine. Like, yo, what? Like, my song was right next to Carrie Job's song. This is before she like blew up and who she is today. But I was like, hey, that's so cool. Like this is the stuff that you dream of.
Mhm. Mhm.
But I was so lost
Mm.
and I was so empty. And it just kept compounding and compounding and compounding.
So, help me understand, for me, there was a realization about hierarchically, right?
Yeah.
Placing the approval of man above the approval of God, right? And basically that turns into like a theological disposition where really your God's too small. Your conception of God is
Yeah.
too small, right? And your conception
Yeah.
of man is too large, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And things like, well, anyway, that's me, and I don't want to go into my stuff, but
No, I love it. I love it.
but
I
I
want to
think
hear this though. I want to
I
hear this
think
stuff.
that's
Keep
what you're
going.
describing, though, right? And
Yeah.
I guess my question is, when did God become right sized in this story? Such that your values were no longer competing, but rather they were at one with one another, and you found
Sure.
yourself serving God instead of serving man. So, just curious. How, how,
There's a f- there there's an embarrassing part I have to be honest with you about. Um, this is where I resonate with Peter, where it took multiple times. I wish I could say I had one encounter and the
Mhm.
Lord changed my life and, oh, okay, that was it. Um, the first one was I lost my voice for a little bit.
Oh, wow.
So we
Singer
recorded
loses.
it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the
Okay.
thing is, I didn't know what was happening, but I realized I had vocal nodules. I graduated college. We recorded an album. I wanted to do all these things. My voice just wasn't quite there the same. And there's a part of it that felt like I was lost. And I was like, what's happening?
Mhm.
My other problem is I don't know how to tell people these things. I have a really bad habit of navigating the storms by myself.
Mhm.
I don't like being a burden to anybody. I like to be a resolver of conflict, but never a bringer of conflict. It's the people pleaser, right? It's the people pleaser in me. So when I'm struggling, like people don't know. I don't tell people. I don't like go to people. So I'll never forget. We had recorded. We went on this. We were in doing this like summer. We had a bunch of shows in the summer. We're playing, and it was fun. It was amazing. And then something felt off. And so later that year in August, I went and got checked, and I realized that there was a vocal nodule. And I was like, "You've got to be kidding me! You've got to be kidding me!" And it was a really pivotal time for my life, but also for the band. And I knew at that point this was not going to be long term for my band. I couldn't put the pressure on them. I was the lead singer. I was a writer. How can I ask them to take a risk if I can't do the craft that I need to do? And that's when I knew I this is not going to happen full time.
Mhm.
So now imagine, just with me for a second, who is Binnell without the music?
Mhm.
Who?
It's like
All
God's
right.
putting his finger exactly on the idol, right?
Like, what are you talking about? Like, what do you mean I can't sing first season of my life? I had fused my identity with my capability
Mhm.
so deeply that when the capability disappeared, the identity collapsed inside for me. I wasn't a person who could sing. I was singing. It was me. I was the songwriter. So you remove the function and there's no person left. And that's the danger of borrowed armor, right?
Mhm.
You become the armor.
Mhm.
You take it off and you think you're nothing. And so the answer was terrifying and liberating at the same time. I was still Binnell. I just didn't know what that meant. All the creativity and the empathy and the vision that made me effective, um, independently of my ability to sing, you know, uh, I had been living a lie deeper than any mask. I believed I was only valuable if my ability to produce something was there. So that value factor, once again, it comes back to my output. And that was this struggle. I had tied my identity so completely to my gift that I couldn't separate who I was from what I could do. And this is the if anyone hears one thing in whether you are in sales or you are in business or you're a mom or a dad or you're a college student or you're running your own business, right? If you tie your identity so completely to your gift, you will lose sight of what you're created for. If think of it this way, imagine you have kids, Jonathan, right? So imagine the first time you gave one of your children a bicycle, okay, and they fell so deeply in love with this bicycle, and they rode this bike everywhere. And they rode the bike so much that they didn't care about John, dad, anymore, right? All they cared about was his bicycle. So they were no longer attached to Jonathan Green, right? All they cared about was, yo, me and this bicycle, we're going to take over the world. We're going to go everywhere in this world. Now, it's such a silly concept, right? It's like, what are you even talking about? Except for the fact that for me, that's what I did. I attached everything that mattered to me to the gift, and I neglected the giver of my gift. And I detached myself from the giver of the gift, making me, when the gift was no longer there, I had no sense of who I was again. And I had this come to Jesus. It took me a number of months. I spiraled in spaces. I found myself in once again in places like I was able to go into a business venture with a friend that did well, and it was great, truthfully. But I was so lost in all of it. I found myself in spaces and in activities that weren't what felt authentic to me, in actions that didn't felt didn't feel right for me, but it was convenient and it was comfortable, right? It's going back to what you know and what's convenient because you lose sight of what is possible. And so the giver of the gift no longer mattered to me because the gift that he gave was lost. And there's no way he'd want me without the gift, John. There's no
Mm,
way.
okay.
Why would he? Until one day he meets me in a doctor's office and reminds me he wanted me all along. And so I go back to an appointment to check on and can I just tell you, all along, I never told people about this. I would just pretend and journey through it by myself because I didn't want to seem like I was trying to get help. I didn't want to seem like I was desperate. So I go to an appointment. I didn't even tell my parents
Mhm.
because I don't want to be a burden for anybody.
You don't wanna displease them either, right? So, you got that
Never.
rolling on, yeah. Mhm.
And between you and me, I also didn't want them to think they were right about me getting a degree in music and not being the way to go, right? Because I can't sing anymore. And I'm like, wait, I don't want them to think they were right about this whole idea of not, pursuing music. And so there were layers to that one, but I didn't tell anybody. But I went to this doctor's office. I'll never forget it. And I thought I was going to need surgery. And I had an endoscopy that was being done. And the doctor looks at me and says, "Hey, what have you been doing?" I was like, "Oh, I know. I kind of like start some really unhealthy habits that I probably shouldn't have done." And she's like, "No, what have you been doing?" And she asked it very pointedly. And I was like, mm. So I'd tell her a few of the things the habits I had picked up at the time. And she's like, "No, what have you?" And I'm like, I'm like, "I don't know what you're talking about." And she's like, "Your nodule has shrunk by 94%."
Oh, boy.
I'm like I'm like, "No, no, 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 no." I'm like, "This is not real. Get out of here." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And I'm not a crier, and I don't like to get emotional because I also grew up in a place where you hide your emotion to an extent. And I wasn't actively in tears and those kinds of things, and I went to my car and I wept because the part that I didn't share was 3 days before that, I wrote in a journal and I said, "All right, God, I can't keep running." And I wrote in a journal, said, "Maybe." I wrote the word maybe. Okay, I gotta be honest with you. I can't pretend like I said it. I said, "Maybe, even if I never sing again, you still want me to be your son." And I closed the journal and I threw away some of the paraphernalia that was in my home. And I try to make a conscious choice to say, I can turn this thing around. And then I go to this doctor and have a moment. And I'm in my car. I'm like, all right, I got you again, God. I know what you're doing. And I see how you're working. And that became the moment where I was like, I'm going to journey on this pathway and I'm going to find the space. So then I make a choice that says, I was doing pretty well at the time. And I made a conscious decision and said that I'm going to transition. And so the plan was I'd find a role in like San Diego or something like that. And I would just leave the business venture that, it was a great opportunity. And, but I was like, I'm just going to leave it and I'm going to go and pursue being a creative director. And then an opportunity opened up in a little town called Hilo, Hawaii. And truthfully, I had no idea where in the world Hilo, Hawaii was. Not a clue. And I thought, this is so embarrassing because I've been living here for 13 years, but I'll just tell it to you, right? I thought it was in the Caribbean, right? I'm like, that's where Hawaii is, right? Because at the time, like it's ignorance to me. I'm never going to go to Hawaii. And I guess opportunity. It was an insane amount of less amount of money that I would make there than I would make like insane less amount of money that I would make there than I would make in the mainland. And I flew out here for an interview and I did not fall in love. It felt like India. Okay. I was like, where am I? It was an open air. The airport wasn't enclosed. It was, like, open outside. I was like, "What the heck? Did I, like, go back in time?" I was like, "What is this place?" There was no air conditioning in most of the houses here, and I was like, "Wait, what is happening? This is such a hot." And I was like, "What?" I was like, "There's no way." But I was here for 7 days. I interviewed. I didn't, like, have this, "Oh my god, I fall in love" moment, you know?
Hmm.
But I'm leaving Kilo. I'll never forget it. I'm sitting on the window seat. I'm looking out the Hilo Bay, and, the Holy Spirit just speaks to me, "You have to go." I'm like, "You gotta be kidding me." This business that could be a great opportunity is a great opportunity is here. And so I tell my business partner at the time, "Hey, I'm gonna leave." He's like, "What are you talking about?" I was like, "Yeah, I'm gonna go." He's like, "Are you joking?" I was like, "No." I tell my friends, I tell the church I'm serving at the time, and everyone's like, "Are you sure about this?" My dad's like, "For what pay? Like, are you sure about this?" Right? Everyone's like, question mark, question mark, question mark.
Hmm.
But I
Hmm.
can't deny that nudge.
Hmm.
I can't deny that nudge that I felt on that flight. And so I knew, okay, I gotta go. And so that was I flew out in May. I packed up my bags, I packed everything into 2 bags and a guitar, and I moved here in 2013. And that was such a small part of the journey. We haven't even man, I am talking way too much. There's so much here, that the last number of years have happened. And so, goodness, Hawaii was the most important season of my life. I know it sounds crazy because we talked so much, but it shifted a lot of how I live my life. Um, I moved to Hawaii. I took this massive pay cut. Um, I'm working at a church here and I'm start doing side business because I need to make because the church can't pay me money. They're paying such a little money, right? So I'm building websites and I started to develop like some app stuff and I started making money in like marketing and it does really well. I'm like, yeah, I'm pretty good at this thing, right? And so um I didn't know all along that have you heard this saying that the body keeps the score? Have
Yes.
you heard this before?
Yeah, there's a
Right?
book, right?
Uh,
Hmm.
yeah. And so, the body keeps a record, the mind cannot falsify, right? So, for years, I was performing fine while my body was screaming parts of me, right? Whether it was like the weight I carried or the burnout, right? The body will always tell the truth, your mouth refuses to speak. And my body was saying, the performance is eventually going to kill you, but I wasn't listening, you know? But life was really good. I met once again some of my closest friends here, met my wife here, and it was this journey that felt right. But the thing that I never ever came head to head with Jonathan was the identity that I never of borrowed armor. There were parts of my life that I still kept hidden for so many years of my life, right? But Hawaii gave me a really clean start. I got to start so fresh in Hawaii that I didn't have to like make things up. I got to try and figure out. But the problem is when you don't know who you are for so long, all you know to do is pretend.
Mhm.
So you keep wearing parts of the borrowed armor.
Mhm.
You keep wearing parts of that and you become really good at it. Right? And so I'm building at this church and it's really great. I lose my entire network, right? Everything I spent years building, my network, my connections, the stages, the platforms, the opportunities, in one moment, no one's paying for you to fly from Hilo, Hawaii to come play somewhere in the mainland. Just so we're clear, it's way too, and I wasn't that good, right? I'm not gonna even pretend. I was not good enough to get flown out from Hawaii to play at places when there's someone who is 70% as good as me for a tenth of my cost all day, they're going to go that way. And so I knew what was happening. I was making a very career ending choice for the music aspect of my life by coming here. And I was okay with it. So I lived here. We were here for a long time. So from 2013 to 2020, I was in Hawaii and it was really beautiful. Um, all along, picking up borrowed armor, picking up different parts of this, these identities I didn't know what was happening.
Mhm.
One of the one of my favorite things I learned, one of the first things, one of my first friends I made here, his name was Kaimana, and love him dearly. Um, and he's from here, born and raised, local Hawaii boy, and we worked in the same office together. And so on all of our breaks and all of our downtime, we just go out. And so he'd take me around and he was like a avid diver and a fisher, super outdoor active dude, right? And so he would take me out into the water. And so one day we go out into the water to go snorkeling and diving. And I am like, yeah, I'll stay at the surface. And this dude just keeps going lower and lower and lower. And I'm like, my buoyancy does not match, John. I
Mhm.
can't do this, man. This doesn't make sense. He comes up and he goes, "You good, B?" I'm like, I can't do it. How do you do this? And he gets out and he hands me this thing that's a weight belt. And I'm like, all right, so you're just trying to kill me. I see what's happening here. You're trying to drown me now. I said, okay, 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 okay. I see the play that's happening
Speak to
here.
the
I see,
Bob.
I see what's happening because every time in a movie or in at an SVU show, I know how you get rid of a body. You put a weight on them and you put them into the water. Except he's like, yo, just chill. What the weight does for you is it gives you the ability to have a level of buoyancy that takes you deeper than you could on your own. And he goes, there's a difference between weight that is controlled and weight that's controlling you. And I'm like, all right. So we put on the belt and somehow I'm 5 feet lower and 10 feet lower and 12 feet lower. I'm like, whoa, the whole different world down here. It's a whole different experience down here. And we came up and he's like, what was that like? I was like, you gotta be kidding me. I never would have experienced this ever before. And that concept, that was in 2013. 9 years later, it changed my life. Like it was a really powerful concept for me. And it birthed this idea that I call like the descent, if that makes sense, right? It's like the concept is you've got to go deeper to go higher. And so if we just fast forward a little bit in part of this, so there's so much more we could talk and feel free to stop me anywhere along the way. And so I had this beautiful encounter. Hawaii was incredible for me. Like, I cannot downplay. It was some of the most healing years of my life. It brought me so much life again, but it never took away the borrowed armor that I wouldn't deal with,
Mhm.
right? Because I'm still performing. Because now I'm Pastor Binnell and I'm impacting so many people, right? And I'm finding this rhythm and this speed of like of success. And I'm like, hey, this is so great. Like, and I feel so invigorated because there's nothing more than a drug than you getting off a platform and someone saying that was the best worship that I ever felt. So
Mhm.
I'm having this like adrenaline shot into my veins every Sunday, and people are just affirming, 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 and I'm like, armor, 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 armor. I'm needed. I'm needed. I'm
Mhm.
needed. I'm
Mhm.
needed. And in 2020, before COVID happens, had the opportunity to take a new role in Toledo, Ohio. And so take the job, and a week later, the entire country shuts down. Still make the choice to go to Toledo. And in hindsight, people who have been close to me ask, like, would you do it the same again? And I would with the caveat, but I moved to Toledo, go on staff at a church there, still get to do some extra work in different spaces. And I all of a sudden found myself mentally in a place again where isolation, because my community is gone again.
Mhm. Mhm.
I had spent the last 7 years building this network of safety, connection, like, of this new identity that I was like, "I could do this." Like, still never taking the time to unravel the years of, the trauma, but I was like, "Hey, I like this a lot better at least," if that makes sense, you know? This feels a lot better for me. So then we journeyed through this season from 2020 to 2022, where, my goodness, I don't know how to quite explain this, but it was internally the hardest turmoil of my life. Uh, I've never felt so isolated internally. I can never, once again, we're back. I can't communicate this,
Mhm.
right? Like, I have a team of 100 plus people who are counting on me.
Mm.
And I'm leading these teams and this movement and these things. And oh yeah, we're in rhythm, we're in good. But internally, I'm like, I'm so alone. I'm so isolated. And so I turned back to coping mechanisms that made sense 14 years ago and slowly begin to unravel my life again. But once again, nobody would ever guess it. Nobody would ever know. So I go back to living in this false reality, new masks, new pain, new secrets. And the greatest gift, I can say this today, many years removed from it, but the greatest gift the Lord gave me was exposure, because He gave me the chance to finally say, what if you honestly just built again? And so in 2022, I found out I was going to be a dad. And I thought for a long time that wasn't going to be in the books for me. And I was okay with it. My wife and I were living a great life, and it was, we traveled and we did all these things. I found I was going to be a dad, and I quickly had this moment. I was like, "Oh my goodness, I'm going to be a dad." It was everything I dreamed of. It was everything I prayed for. It was everything I ever wanted.
Mhm.
And I had re-picked up these habits that I never want my son to have to deal with. There's an old saying that the sins of the father will be passed to the son if he doesn't look them in the face and deal with them. And I said, I don't want to be the reason my son needs to struggle, but I wasn't brave enough to deal with it. So the Lord made the choice for me, and it was exposed. And so in early part of that year, it was brought to the light, and uh, I did what I knew how to do. I disappeared. So sold the house I bought. Um, we moved back to Hawaii, deleted all my existence off of social places, and I'm in what we'll call my Lodabar. I am in the lowest place of my life. I'm in hiding, and I'm like, "You've gotta be kidding me. Like, this can't be the life that I'm living." And, but God, uh, allowed me to see light again. And this is where I told you, I think earlier, that at some point, when the Lord has purpose on you, you can't run from it.
Hmm.
Because the truth was, the relief for me was, finally, I don't need to keep performing. And thank goodness you're done with me, God. Right? I'm being super candid with you. I can do the things that I want to do, quote unquote, right? I had no idea what that meant, right? But I just didn't want to disappoint God anymore. And so this journey of faith, I was like, okay, I'm going to rebuild. And I knew I could. I found a lot of success in so many spaces, right? I knew what's possible. I knew what I could do. I'd helped companies achieve seven figures. All right, I could. I'd helped people grow like 4 or 5x in businesses and even in church operation things, right? And so I knew what I knew. I knew what I could do,
Hmm.
but I also found it came with an unraveling of who I am, and so the rebuild began. And that's when I recognized it's a now I have words for it now. I didn't have it at the time,
Hmm.
right? And I realized that borrowed armor finally got to get taken off of me.
Hmm.
And part of the beginning of this, like the journey of descent for me was like you got to go deeper to go higher,
Hmm.
right? And so the beginning of it was like recognition, right? So seeing the armor exist, you can't remove what you can't see. So for me, I had a really encounter moment when I moved back here and then my son is born and I'm like, okay, but I'm still like lost in these things, right? And so my son is born and I'm still trying to navigate who Binal is and I'm unraveling armor in these parts of my life. And my son is 5 months old and this weight in my head is so strong and so painful. And I'm just like, I can't do this. And I make the plans to take my life. Because I had a really strong life insurance policy, right, that I pay for every month, that I called them and I figured out the nuances of the policy, and I knew exactly how it would function versus how it would not function so that the payout would sustain them for the rest of, you know, like, their lives, and they'd be fine, and navigated all these things so intricately for a few weeks
Mm.
to the day I planned it, and I walked to the shore of where I was like literally to the shore of where it was gonna happen, and it was gonna be an accidental. Like I planned this so to a T, but the Lord wasn't done with me. And I'll tell you the encounter that happened. It's hard to explain. I left my phone, my laptop, everything I owned on my desk in my office. I put my AirPods in my ear so that people wouldn't bother me. It's downpouring rain, and I walk across to the head of this waterfall, and I stand at the head, and I'm sitting there, and I'm saying one last prayer, and as I'm there in tears, weeping, there's a chorus that says, "Your promise still stands. Great is your faithfulness, your faithfulness. I'm still in your hands. This is my confidence. You've never failed me yet." Listen, there's no electronic device around me, on me. I am at least 200 plus yards from my office at this point, and my AirPods start playing music, and I literally scream, "Stop." I scream, "Stop," so loud because I'm like, I can't, I just want the opportunity to be done because I thought that's what I needed to do. But he's not done with me. And he was far from it. And that was the beginning of recognition for me. I said, I have to be able to look at this and say, I can't keep living this way. And so this was now what the third time God encountered me to re-meet me, but now in a very new way. Because this time it literally cleared every playing field for me to make the choice to take off this thing. So I recognized it, and I had to have this moment of what I call the reckoning. Um, I had to count what the armor cost, not just what it gave me, but what it took from me. The years, the relationships that got the perform version of me, um, the person that may have supposed to be there. There's a you can't transform what you won't mourn sometimes, right? It's
Mhm.
a
Mhm.
the sunk cost fallacy,
Mhm. Mhm.
where I've invested 25 years of my life becoming this person, this identity for so long, and how am I going to walk away now? Who the heck am I, right? But continuing to wear this armor was going to crush me so bad, and it doesn't honor who I'm called to be. And crushing me doesn't give me the chance to be the man my son needs. And so I decided if I'm going to move forward, I got to be willing to look back and acknowledge what the armor cost me and what the armor gave me. It's twofold here. So I had this reckoning. I went from recognition to reckoning to then release, actually letting go. And this was probably the hardest stage because not because it's just complex, but because the survival system in you fights it so deeply, right? Like um, the um, the amygdala,
Mhm.
right? It's like it'll hijack,
Mhm. Yep.
right, to this, so when I wanted to release the armor, the survival system, the amygdala, right? It's the part that's created, it sounds every alarm it has, right? So your heart races, right? The palms get sweaty, your body screams. If you take this off, you will die. You will
Mhm.
not be seen. You will
Mhm.
not be valued. It's not being dramatic. From the perspective of your survival system, it's telling the truth. It's telling its truth, not the truth. And I had this moment where the armor, I had to own the armor kept me alive for so long, John.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I won't ever deny that, right?
Mhm.
Uh, then comes the extinction burst, right? If you want to call it that, right? So when you stop reinforcing a behavior, it gets worse before it gets better, right? You may have heard this before. Like the old patterns, like fight like hell before they finally fade.
Mhm.
And I just spend the next few weeks in therapy, in conversations, um, realizing that 25 years of armor doesn't release quietly.
Mhm.
So release is not breakthrough; it's a practice. It's a series of small refusals, and each one is teaching your nervous system that the armor isn't as necessary as it believed.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
And man, was that so hard but so healthy for me. And that led me to what went from um, recognition to reckoning to release to reconstruction, and building from authentic foundations and not becoming someone new, but revealing who I actually was underneath the whole time.
Mhm.
And this is probably my favorite part of this whole season of my life is learning the beauty of neuroplasticity,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Where it became my best friend.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
every time I chose an authentic response over the performed one, I'm creating that new groove in my brain, right? And the old grooves don't disappear overnight, but the new ones get deeper with repetition. So one choice repeated enough times creates a new default. And that's what I got to start doing in my life. To finally stage five, the one that I'm walking into the season of life is the rise, right? So we went from recognition to reckoning to release to reconstruction to finally rise, or if you want to call it integration, operating from authentic capacity as the baseline and not my peak performance. And so I realized that Rise doesn't look like Triumph. It looks like a Tuesday at 3 a.m., my laptop open, and I'm building a business and a brand that I know is possible for me.
Mhm.
Being present with my son, it's saying, I don't know in a meeting where before I'd have to lie and pretend like I did know
Mhm.
and sitting in silence. It's a
Mm.
regular day lived by a person who knows who they are.
Mm.
And this entire space of the descent of what I learned with wearing a weight belt as controlled weight can give you experiences that you never would have felt before, where weight that controls you will kill you.
Mhm. Mhm.
Where for a long time the weight was controlling me and it was killing me, finally I took back the control and let the weight give me an experience of life and not destroy me. And so it changed who I am. It changed what I get to do. And since then, I've had the absolute honor of helping impact hundreds and hundreds of lives and companies and businesses. And I can't express to you how incredibly grateful I am that I'm still here today.
How did you perceive God viewed you previously, and how do you perceive God views you now?
Oh, my identity was so consumed by the things I did for God.
Mhm.
And that was what made me good enough to be his son. So when I'm serving, right? Or when I'm on a platform speaking, or when I'm leading the groups, oh, and this comes back to my young childhood. Okay. It all comes full circle again, right? Because I equate my value with my output.
Mhm.
So I treated God the same way. He never asked this of me, just so we're clear. God never once said, "You're only as good to me as what you do for me." That was never something, but I convinced myself of it. So
Mhm.
previously, right? That's what I believed.
Mhm.
And then now in my life, honestly, this is the healthiest I've ever. It's also the most unique I've been with God, right? Like so, I'm not. I don't serve at a church. I in confession, I don't even attend regularly on Sunday mornings. That's a confession that people are like, but I spend more time with the Lord now than I probably ever have before without agendas. And I believe in the gathering of believers. I think
Mhm.
it's very important. I
Mhm.
really do. And so I believe in the local church. I believe in it very much so. And this season of my life has put me in a space where I have come into communion with God in a way for me that's really transformed how he sees me. And I'm son because I'm son.
Mhm.
And now my value factor to the Lord was never output based because truthfully, there's no output I can give him.
Right. Right.
And so now I get to just be.
Mhm.
I'm just Binnle. I'm not
Mhm.
Pastor Binnle or worship leader Binnle or, in that regard, I'm
Mhm.
just Binnle. I'm just
Sure.
son.
Sure.
And I'm finally understanding. I get to read scripture or have worship or play my guitar without the agenda of preparing for a set or making the experience feel cool or creating that moment that people want. No,
Mhm.
it's none of that actually.
Mhm.
It's simply the reality for me where it's like, oh, I get to be.
Mhm.
And I'm so grateful that I get to be because all along for all of us, it was never about what we can do or what we output for him. He doesn't
Mhm.
need anything from us.
Mhm.
And let's not ever be misunderstood, right? Because like God needs nothing from you. Never has, never will. And if you think he does, you have really misunderstood how important you are. You know what I mean? And, it's a really false dichotomy of your life that you convince yourself that you are important enough that God needs you to make the
Absolutely.
impact he needs. 'Cause if he
Absolutely.
doesn't have you, the rocks will do it for him, right? If you're not gonna talk, a donkey will go ahead and talk on your behalf. So don't ever think you're so important, right? But the privilege I get is to be in partnership with the Father.
Mhm.
What greater gift can you have than a moment where you can be in partnership with him? And so for me, it's that simple as that. Like it's just I get to be without having to perform. And it's a reality that I didn't know what that meant before, but it's a reality I'm so grateful for. I'm
Amen.
so grateful for it.
Amen. Well, let's segue. This is great. Thank you. Let's segue a little bit about what are you doing today? You've mentioned several times that you're now helping business owners. So tell us a little
Yeah,
bit
yeah,
about that.
absolutely. It's a one of the beautiful things in my life is I've always lived a multifaceted life, and so I'm gonna hit the high points really fast. Right? There's in this current season of life, there's 4 avenues that I get to like live my life in, or five. The most important is I'm a father, and that's the most beautiful gift that I get. Parker is like the greatest joy of my life and the greatest gift of my life, and I'm so blessed to be his dad. Um, I get to help serve at a not for profit in Hilo called the Arc of Hilo. And we're a job and life training facility for people with developmental disabilities. And I get to specifically help them in the creation of their hospitality program. So we helped them launch the first vocational training cafe on the island and a large event space that trains individuals with disabilities how to work in hospitality. That's a really fun opportunity I get to work with here on the island. Um, 2+ years ago, I started working with the research arm of the university in Hawaii, and they brought me on to be the senior advisor for small businesses. So I get to work with hundreds of businesses that are either existing business looking to scale and grow, or are startups who are looking to see if this is the right fit for them. And so that's a really beautiful part of what I get to do. Um, about something I've done for a long time is coaching, right? For leadership, because it's something that I've been deeply inside of me. So I've done it for a very long time, but I formalized it probably 2.5 years ago into this process that I call the descent now, right? It's had a few names, or like it was called rooted for a little bit. It was called different things. And it's the descent model that I use so that the recognition, reckoning, release, reconstruction, and rise. And it's a process I took executive teams through 5 steps to how do you better understand your team so you can grow in ways that will multiply your output. Right. And so it's called Empower Potential. And we've had the chance to work with about 15 companies so far. And it's been really, really amazing. We wrote a proprietary test that will then formulate a map of your team together for you. And
Hmm.
it helps our executive teams look at it from a 30,000-foot perspective to see what's happening. And then we get ground level and we do the hard work to actually make the team function more effectively and efficiently. Probably that's a really beautiful thing I get to work on. But the project that is the project of my season of my life that's the freshest, but also I think the most powerful is a program called Clavara. And so Clavara was first birthed, the concept at least was birthed in 2022. And the concept, I had it actually while I was in that trauma therapy place for 21 days. I wrote it in a book actually. And
Hmm.
I wrote in a book, I said, I wish I could help small businesses get help. That's all I really wrote, right? Because I did a lot of marketing for people for like, so many folks. And I met with so many leaders of businesses and I talked to them. And the biggest struggle I found, it wasn't that they couldn't do what they needed to do for their business. So like say they ran a food truck. They're really good at cooking. Or say they ran a clothing company. They're really good at designing clothes, right? Or say they ran a salon. They're really good at doing nails or hair or, whatever, or they're HVAC folks, right?
Hmm.
So a lot of service based. They're really good at what they do. The part they have a hard time was operations, actually running the business side of it.
Hmm.
And that's the part of my brain that makes the most sense.
Hmm.
And so I had this concept in 2022, and over the course of a few ways, I lost access to the IP for it, right? For the intellectual property for it. And I thought it was done and it was over with. And in December, I got it back. And so it was a really special part for me because I started to build, John. And I mean, I
Hmm.
iterated. It's only been a few months now, but um, Clavara is a software that we call it. It's a every business deserves a team. Clavara is yours. So we are a team for your business. So
Okay.
we help you in the operational side for it. So what does that mean? So think of it this way: you own a business and you are stagnant. So or you're struggling to find growth or sustain some aspects of your business. Clavara comes beside you. What I was able to develop and was able to create is a tool for you that every Monday you will get one directive of an action step you take that week to take a step forward. One of the biggest reasons that businesses fail is the inability to take steps because they try to do too much at one time.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm a big believer of you look at the macro, you work in the micro, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what's the macro? Okay, cool. Now let's make it micro so we can get to the macro, right? So then we break the goal into micro steps so they get there. But that's just one part of it. Then between Monday to Monday, we go for you and we take action. So we have levers for different services. So say you own an HVAC business and you sent out a quote to somebody, but you haven't got heard back. All you do is you text Clavara, sent $500 quote to Keith. Clavara says, awesome. What's Keith's phone number? Then Clavara will send in your voice, follow up. Hey, Keith, thanks for asking for the quote. Wanted to check. Do you have any questions? We'd love to see how we can get that quote done for you. So it does an automatic in your voice text follow up for you. Okay. Then you finish a job, you text Clavara, just finished this job. Cool. Clavara is like, let me get their number and we'll text them to get you a review. One of the biggest gaps in businesses is they don't get reviews. And they forget in today's world with AI and the more you have out there that speaks about you, the better you get put on these engines of authority, right? And then the third aspect is we help you reclaim your money. So say you have unpaid invoices or say you have people who keep no showing, Clavara will also follow up on those things and request payment for you.
Okay.
But one of the coolest features that I'm really excited about, and I know someone else is going to try to do the same thing, we built an engine for you to have an AI conversation via text message without needing an app. So you know how you have to go to ChatGPT and type into ChatGPT to have a conversation. So what we did was we have an engine called Ask Clavara, right? And just so we're clear, this is built on a localized AI through 3,000 hours of coaching of my brain that protects the integrity of the information that we're putting out there. So it is not just open LLM. It's not just like a Claude API. While we are tied to API aspects to it, right? We also are very localized in what the brain is fed and how it's taught, how it communicates, right? So it's very informed, very data driven. It's based on your location. It's based on your industry. It's very it understands you, and it wants to know it grows with you. The more data it gets, the better it understands you, right? So 6 months in, and it's seen how much you've grown, it progresses you, and so you set your goals, and we help you get to your goals. So Ask Clavara now, you would just take your phone, right, and you would just text Clavara. All you do is Clavara, I'm really struggling with this. What can I do? And it will then tag our AI engine, our closed loop, and with the API, and it'll answer you to your text message, the response.
Nice.
So we have an incredible dashboard that you can get really cool tools. We have really fun stuff on there, but I wanted the ease of access to be right here on your text. So I wanted to give people access to an AI engine without having to open an app. So you can just go to the text and ask your question and it'll respond to you with the intellectual thing you need right there.
That's awesome.
And so that was probably one of my favorite features that when and this came from iteration, right? Because I want to talk to people. So I had 50 businesses walk through a beta with me and they gave me great feedback. And I kept iterating through feedback and we're able to build to this space. And I really believe this will be a game changer for so many small businesses because a lot of them, it's $49 a month. And so we're basically helping you get a part-time operations team, right? A follow-up engine, these real-time help for you and actually steps you can take for a fraction of what it would cost you to hire someone to do it.
Fantastic.
Yeah. And so that's the business, Clavara. I really believe in it deeply. I get really passionate about this, I get really excited about this because I know with all my heart, this could change the small business industry. And my heart has always been one thing: how do I help? And so even if you don't actually get a membership, we built tools on there, right? Or no, I think now we just hit 90. Actually, I saw this morning, people have gone through it and people are like, Man, that thing was so mean to me, but it was not being mean. It's because like that because because here's the thing. One of the biggest mistakes I see is people will try to start a business too early or they haven't thought it through enough. And there's nothing I want less than you starting a business with debt without the preparation on how to make your money back.
Sure.
Because it's a bad choice for you,
Sure.
right? I believe that small businesses are the backbone of our country, but it needs to be done correctly with intention.
Hmm.
And so the lead generator you want to call it, but should I start this business is an intentionally built program so that you would take it. It take you maybe like 8 minutes. You answer in depth, and then it gives you a very calculated reasoning behind. We also built a 7-part series called Business 101. One of mine is free. The first 3 parts are free. Then you get a 7-day free trial so you can finish all 7. So I essentially wanted to make that class free for you, right? So you get module 1, 2, and 3 are fully free. Then once you finish module 3, you get 7 days free. So you can finish it and then you can cancel. I don't
Hmm.
cancel after, it's fine. Go ahead. But do the 7 modules.
Hmm.
And Business 101 is a foundational course on ownership, on structure, on taxes, on how to understand pricing, on how to understand hiring employees that anyone who start a business should take, right? I wanted to make it interactive. I wanted to make it not a PDF. And sometimes you can't watch a YouTube video, right? So you can, on your break, you can just kind of go through it and boom, you can do 7. You can learn about the basics of business and have a foundation before you start.
Excellent.
And then and the third really fun tool is um, we started a test for current owners of companies that is this business going to crush me? It asks you 7 hard questions that goes deep into is your business actually building you or crushing you? And
Mm,
it's a really important framework because the hope is then Clavara can come beside you and help you build. Like
gotcha.
last year alone, 965,000 companies closed last year.
Mm,
And that breaks my heart
mm,
because a lot of them closed because they didn't have enough of a runway to turn it around.
mhm,
My heart is that Clavara becomes a runway. We want to walk beside you in the journey of small business so that you can go from 300,000 to 1 million to 5 million to 10 million, right? We want you to create a sustainable business because it changes the economy of our country and the course of your family and your life. And so I deeply believe in what this is. The mission of it, the heart of it, right? Because we want to be the partner that walks alongside of you. And we want to help you attain and reach the goals we know are possible for you. So Clavara is it's the dream, it's the mission, it's happening right now. And I really believe in where it's going to go in the next season.
Vanilla, it's awesome. Awesome.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. This has
Yeah, I
been an
appreciate it.
amazing conversation.
I had no idea where we're gonna go with this, but it was. I'm really grateful for the chance just to be here and speak. One of the things the last thought, living under a false identity will really take you down pathways that are never meant for you.
Mhm,
I'm raising a son that will not inherit the armor that was never mine to wear. And if there's one thing that an owner of a business, that a parent, that a student who hears this will learn from me, I hope is just one simple thing. The armor that was yours will never serve you, it'll destroy you. Who you are, as you are, is enough, will always be enough, and was meant to be enough. And the lie that society and the world will try to convince you is that you need to put on armor to be enough, and take it from a guy who almost lost his life a few times. The armor is never meant for you. You can defeat the giants in your life. You have what it takes, but you will not defeat the giants wearing what helps someone else when you were created to fight the fight the way you were created to fight the fight.
God be the glory.
Yeah. Amen.
All right. Thanks, Benno.
Thanks, John.